Hello, can everybody hear me? How about that? Does that carry way back there? Reverberates? Well, my name is Michael Carter, and welcome to another program of the Monroe County History Club. Welcome to my lovely wife, Paulette. My brother Steve is here, and a couple of my cousins way back there, I think. Hello. With this program, we're marking the 10th anniversary of our existence. And and to help us celebrate it is George Carpenter. You might not recognize him. He has a beard now, but that's George. But George hadn't been here for a little while, and thank God he was able to get back for our 10th anniversary. So, George, I'll let you say a few words since you've been absent for so darn long.
It's great to see all of you, and great to be seen. I want to thank the Legion, of course, for hosting this presentation. I don't know of anywhere else in the country you do this sort of thing. I don't know where anywhere else in the country where a community gets together and discusses highlights of history and things that we do here at the Legion. This is a very unusual and very fortunate thing for us, and it's really good to be able to see all of you. This time last year, it's good for you to see me, because this time last year I was fighting for my life with a case of pneumonia. So here I'm back on board with things. One of the things that we had with pneumonia is occasionally I have these memory lapses. I think you call that an adult moment. Yeah. I'd like to introduce my wife, Mary Ann, who comes to us via Texas. She's the hard living spouse for 55 years. So she certainly deserves the applause for that. I'd like to offer our thanks to Katz. Sometime in the near future, Katz is going to do a presentation here. You, in this community, Bloomington, you don't know what an asset you have in the cable access television service, Katz. I'm looking forward to seeing their presentation. I'm hoping to be back in the months to come. Have I forgotten anything major? Oh, yes, one major thing. How many of you are on our distribution for email? How many of you wish you weren't? Okay. If you ever decide that you don't want to be on the distribution, let me know. We now have 5 groups of 50. So if you see that on there it says group 1, group 3, whatever, it's completely arbitrary about where you are as far as the groups are concerned. At any rate, if you would like to be on our email distribution list, please see me at the conclusion of the meeting. And print out your email for me, and I will put that on our list. With that, I want to mention Donna. Yeah, yes, I do. Thank you, Mike. There comes my sandwich, you know. How did all this get started? And it's going to take just a minute, but it's worth it. Mike and I were talking about, well, you know, we ought to do something to get together with a bunch of people that enjoy history. And Mike's really responsible for this because he invited me to a meeting at the History Center with John Winiger when they were talking about doing local publications on PBS, on the WTIU. So Mike invited me over, and Mike and I got talking about it afterwards. So we started putting some people together, Skip Chambers, Donna Stogsdill, Shelby Kaiser, and Frida Robinson got together. Are any of those people here tonight? This afternoon, rather. Is Shelby? Shelby Kaiser was instrumental in this coming here. We got together in the basement of the library, and we knew that wasn't going to work right away. So we came here. We originally met in the Blue Room, which is down. We had a small meeting, and well, that's good, isn't it? And we had a small meeting, and we could have put maybe all the people at this table in that one room. Now these things have grown to in excess of, how many did they, Clay? 80? Yeah, 80 people, sometimes more than 100. And I thank you very much for coming to honor history by making history by being here. You all have a pleasant day. It's great to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks, George. And here's the director of the History Center, Daniel Schlegel.
Thank you, Michael. I just have a couple of quick announcements. I had to make sure I wrote these down so I did not forget any of these. We have this coming Saturday, here it is, March 4th at 1 p.m. we have a free talk at the History Center. It's called Making Memory. It's about quilting and some local artists that are involved with that. So please feel free to come down to the History Center at 1 o'clock this coming Saturday. And then on March 17th, which is a Friday, 18th and 19th, we have Resilience Productions putting on one of their plays in the History Center. We have limited seating for those, and we're selling tickets. So if anyone here has been to one of the Resilience Productions, you know they'll sell out fast, and they're always excellent. So please feel free to get tickets or come see us with any questions. And then we also have on Saturday, April 1st, and this is not an April Fool's joke, I promise, but on Saturday, April 1st at 2 o'clock, we have Charlotte Zitlow coming in to give a talk about her new book. We also have those for sale. I'm over here on the right side. I'm testing everyone. You know, you have to check what side we're on today. But over here to my right, I brought some of her books if you're interested in getting that before her presentation. But we have those and a lot of new books at the History Center. And then just so everyone knows, if you've not been in recently, we have the Alexander Memorial exhibit up. It will come down in early to mid-June. I forgot to check the exact date, so just come before June and you'll be okay. 24th? Perfect, thank you. And then we also have a quilting exhibit that's up right now that ties in the history of the Showers Brothers factory, about preservation work, so when people donate items to us, how we work to save them. This Showers Brothers quilt is over 100 years old, and we still have it, and it looks pretty good, but we're always trying to help save it to make it last a little longer. And that exhibit will come down in mid-March, so make sure if you have any interest in Showers Brothers Factory or quilting, make sure to get in to come see that. Otherwise, after the presentation, I'm really excited about, I'm going to be over here, like I said, to my right. I'll have books, or I can answer any other questions about what we have going on. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Daniel. Here's our coming attractions for this year. Quite a few good programs. Our next one will be March 28th. Hillary Fleck of the Monroe County History Center presents highlights from the Herald Times photo collection. The Herald Times donated all their old negatives and photos to the History Center, and they're scanning them as we speak, and they'll have quite a collection of old photos to show us on that day. April 25th, John Brayton has a program called What Would It Be Like to Walk Down the Streets of Bloomington More Than 100 Years Ago? The Rediscovering Bloomington project seeks to answer these questions and more using old Sanborn fire maps, and to me that just sounds fascinating. May 30th, Susan Snyder-Salmon will do a program on the history of dry stack stone walls in Monroe County. They can be found all over the county, and most of them are very old. June 27th, Jim Kapshew, who's the official historian of Indiana University, will give a program on the life and times of Herman B. Wells. July 25th, Cats TV, as George mentioned, will give a program. The people who record all our programs have been in operation over 45 years and have done a lot for the community. August 29th, Christine Friesel will give a program on the time period of the 1870 to 1890s, or the Gilded Age. specifically the 6th Street neighborhood and new Showers Brothers facilities and the telephone companies and newspapers, daily life and politics, entertainment of that period long ago. September 26th, Rod Spa will give a program on the local Feltus family and their family newspaper. October 31st, Dr. Clay Stuckey, a good friend of mine, who's given many programs here before, will give a program we've long awaited, a history of the campus of the old Bloomington High School. Now, some of these things are subject to change. You know, things may get switched around. I'll keep you notified in a timely fashion. So today's speaker, we have Jim Krause. I had never met Jim before today. Jim is an adventurer, sailor, photographer, videographer, and a faculty member of the Media School at Indiana University, where he teaches filmmaking, graphics, animation, and documentary production. His program today is called 100 Years of the Indiana Theater: What I Learned from Producing the WTIU documentary, The Indiana Theater at 100 Years Old. So, Jim?
Look at that. It has to be like screwed together all in one piece. I could just holler. Let's see, is this thing on? Yes. Okay, good. Well, hi there. Thanks so much for putting up with me for the next 3 hours. Nah. I'll try to deliver. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Daniel. Thank you, Monroe County History Club, for having me and what you do. It's very important to keep these, to keep the history alive. So, yeah, I'm Jim Krause. I teach in the media school. That's my day job. My night job is doing photography and producing some documentaries every now and then for WTIU. And the last one was this thing, Indiana Theater at 100, the evolution of the Buskirk-Chumley. And that's a little bit tagged on. So what I thought I would cover is just talk about the process, give you a little peek behind the scenes, some of the discoveries that I came across. I'm not going to tell you everything in the documentary because that would be redundant. You can just watch the documentary. But I'll tell you some things that didn't make it into the documentary, right? And then, of course, some Q&A. And as we go along, if there's something that really strikes you, I don't mind if someone asks a question just while we're going through. It's totally fine. Okay, well, this is the Indiana Theater at 100. This is a part of making a documentary. You have to work up the graphics. It was originally called the Buskirk-Chumley at 100. And then, actually, I had an issue with that because like when I came here back in 1978, I didn't come here to go to the Jacobs School of Music. I came here to go to the IU School of Music. And then they changed the name. And so from a storytelling perspective, it gets very confusing when Harry P. Vonderschmidt comes to Bloomington to start the Buskirk-Chumley Theater. It's like, whoa, what's going on? Yeah, so I pushed for keeping the title at the Indiana Theater at 100, and then we give it, we of course pay tribute to the whole naming and talk about what's in a name. Now, I'll play you some of that. So starting out, what does one do starting out? So it began with a proposal and an outline from the Buskirk-Chumley Theater Centennial Committee, and this was basically Glenda Murray, who I'm sure a lot of you folks know. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, this project would not have happened without Glenda. And many thanks to Sarah Laughlin and Lily Bonwich, but they were like the dream team that put together this proposal. And I don't want to say it was a no-brainer proposal, but they had outlined the history so well, WTIU could not say no, because they did such a good job with that. And an excellent, of course, you guys have probably seen history on the BCT's website, but they have a very nice timeline of what happened and who some of the people were. And if you walk up into the mezzanine on the second floor of the theater, there's a wonderful display put together by Sue Ferrantino's, Danielle McClellan's partner, who's a historian. Well, okay, so what does one do? Well, we have to give it a name, which changed. We had to create what's called a treatment. It's basically an outline. That's what we do when you're making a TV show or a film or a documentary. You just basically do a rough sketch of what the story, what the scenes are. And then I started collecting information, sorting by date, because as I put together the history of the theater, it needed to have context in what was going on in Bloomington and what was going on in the world. Because, you know, what happens locally reflects a lot of the stuff that's depression, you know, wars, pandemics, what's going on across the globe. And then I don't like to capture footage before I have a plan, but I did. And I had to capture Danielle McClellan's interview because she was leaving town. She was moving out west to do something. And if you don't know Danielle McClellan, she was a wonderful director, executive director. She was basically the first executive director of the Buskirk-Chumley Theater after it became the Buskirk-Chumley Theater. She was there for about 20 years. Yeah, what else? So it took me, I had about a year to produce this thing, and so I had to research, I had to find facts and imagery, I had to develop the story, I had to capture interviews, footage, had to create graphics. We have to, you know, this stuff costs money to do, all the airtime, so we had to do underwriting, open and close. I had to do editing, a lot of editing, sound design, and then just technically the finished product for a PBS type documentary. It has to be exactly 56 minutes and 46 seconds, exactly, not one frame over. So that's just some of the stuff that you got to do. And then, of course, there are web and DVD, Blu-ray extras, and then it has to be closed caption because that's what, you know, we have to have it accessible. So my resources, the Monroe County History Center, that was kind of my go-to, and a huge shout out to the people at the Monroe County History Center. Hillary, Daniel, Megan, they were just instrumental in helping me get pictures. Because if it's one thing to come up with facts, but facts make a terrible documentary. It's more interesting to have someone telling a story and to be able to illustrate that story. And that's a big challenge when you're putting together a documentary. The Monroe County Library, Public Library, they have a wonderful timeline, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. You can scroll through and see what was happening in Bloomington, like when the hospital was made, when they moved IU, things like that. IU Center for Documentary Research and Practice, IU Libraries, they have image archives, moving image archives, the archives of traditional music. And then there were some sort of amateur history websites out there, and they were actually really helpful. So just Cinema Tour and Cinema Treasures. And these are put together by just sort of amateurs. They're passionate about old theaters, and they have tracked theaters across the globe. So anyway, that's where I started finding information. So stuff that was tough to find, it was really tough to find early issues of Bloomington newspapers. It's not that hard to find things that are recent, but for some reason well, it wasn't the HT, there were so many different newspapers before the Herald telephone, and those, you can find some, I guess, at the library, but they're not indexed. So it was really difficult finding old stuff. It had to come out of scrapbooks and things like that. Pictures of the Indiana theater from the 20s or through 50s, or even modern theaters such as the General Cinemas Showplace in the College Mall. It was tough to find some pictures of that. And then firsthand accounts of and stories of the theater in early years. I did come across a wonderful collection of audio transcripts, and they were transcribed, and this is, of course, thanks to Glenda and Lily and Sarah. This is from the IU Center of Documentary Research and Practice, and they have some wonderful interviews with like Bob Crouch, some of the people who used to work at the theater. So anyway, just to give you a little context, I will show you some pictures. Indiana was, of course, not the first movie theater in Bloomington. Let's see what I'm looking at. I'm showing you this picture. It was from 1937, and I would often find a marquee, and in order to find out when it happened, the picture was taken, and just look up the movie premiere, and then you could pretty much come up with a pretty close, hey, it came out about then. Let's see, I got a little tiny little buzz. Oh well, such is life. There were a couple other downtown theaters. Of course, there was that Harris Grand that opened in 1907 by John Harris. It was owned by him. And it later, of course, I mean, it burned, it fell down, it was rebuilt, it became the town cinema, it fell down. It fell down, it couldn't stand up, so it's gone. And then there was the Princess Theater, which is, of course, still here, and it was constructed by the same fella, John Harris, and I think the idea was that it was going to be fancier. I think that was the idea of the Princess, and don't quote me on that. Theater versus theater. Oh, you know, devil's in the details. It is frustrating because, like, there you'll see someone has written Princess Theater spelled E-R up in the top right-hand corner of the photo, but it's clearly called the Theater Princess Theater R-E. And so little things like this are really annoying for editors because it's like, well, what is this? Is this theater or is it theater? So you'll see it was the Indiana Theater spelled R-E, and all of those were spelled R-E. When it became the Buskirk-Chumley Theater, the Buskirk-Chumley Theater, of course, is spelled E-R. So there is a method to that, and I'm trying to just stay accurate with how it was represented. Okay, so a few other downtown theaters. There was the Ritz Theater, which of course turned into the Vonley, and there was the Roxy Theater. And that, according to the Monroe County Public Timeline, this was on the site of the former Crescent Theater, and this is right north of Graham Plaza, where I guess it's the Hilton Garden. So that was there. No? Oh. Okay, so interesting discoveries, some things that I found. I found that facts can be very difficult to verify, especially when sources don't agree. So case in point, Harry P. Vonderschmidt, according to most obituaries, he was born in Du Bois County. And you can find several obituaries. They pretty much say the same thing about where he was born and, of course, where he died. However, I sleuthed a little bit, and I went to Daviess County records, and I found the marriage certificate of November, and Harold Peter Vonderschmidt. And according to the marriage certificate, he was born in Washington. That's not Du Bois County, that's Daviess County. I don't know. I mean, it could have been that when he filled out his marriage certificate, it was like, well, I'm living in Washington. So, I mean, I just don't know. And I came across a number of things that just didn't mesh. So I don't know, you know, I'm just trying to put a documentary here together for TV. I'm not writing a book. I mean, if I was, I would really go down there and I would do a little more research. But anyway, back in the day, before TV, going to the theater was a special occasion. People got dressed up, and when you did go to the theater, you would find the ushers wearing uniforms, and common townsfolks like me and us, we would be treated with respect, maybe more than we deserved, you know. But it was like, do you remember flying like 30 years ago? It used to be nice. People would ask what you'd want, and but going to the theater was special. People were treated very special. It was. And this is, I found this picture, many thanks to Sue Talbot, because she had a scrapbook from her father, the projectionist, Roy Hayes. And this was sitting in her scrapbook, and it was like, oh man, that's great. And in this picture, it's like you see the Vonderschmidts, and they're surrounded by all of their staff, all their minions, you know, and it's just, they were so grandiose. And I didn't go into a whole lot about Harry P. von der Schmidt, but some of you know about the von der Schmidt house, Castle House on Hawthorne. Kendall Reeves did a wonderful, not Kendall, I forgot this other wonderful photographer. His name is escaping me. He's in the credits, but he did a wonderful photo spread for Bloom magazine of the von der Schmidt Castle House. But anyway, they carried themselves like royalty. Okay, so other interesting discoveries. If you go on the timeline, of course, Hoagy Carmichael is touted. Oh, Hoagy Carmichael played between shows. And, you know, that's true, but it was his mom who was really doing she was gigging. She was a professional keyboardist. She did this in her part-time to supplement her household income. She would play at the Princess. She would play at different theaters. And her son, of course, was an awesome musician, and she'd bring young Hoagland around. And then Hoagy brought sometimes his band, the Collegians, but it was all started by Lida. And there's some nice pictures of Lida that you can see at the IU Library's Archives of Traditional Music. And a nice picture of her. She was 20 years old, the picture on the left. So a lot happened in the theaters opened in 22. They were doing vaudeville and silent movies, and we had keyboardists play and little acts play in between movies. And just within 10 years, they transitioned to talking pictures. And that happened right at the Great Depression when that hit. And theaters had, it was a struggle because they had to get new technology. And so, you know, ultimately what happened is like 10 years later in the 30s, you weren't going to see Hoagy or Lida, you weren't going to see keyboardists because they had gotten rid of the organs and the pianos, and they had replaced them with Vitaphone and Movietone. The poor Ritz, they opened in 1928. They didn't last very long, and they closed. And according to one source, it became Peterson's, not the deli that you guys might remember, but it became a grocery store until the von der Schmidts purchased it. Okay, I'm going to play a little clip from the doc. Let's see. Hopefully the audio works. We'll see. We'll see if the audio works. And maybe not. Oh, it's playing out through the projector. I'll just pause. I'll ask a technical question. Michael, is there a way to, I guess there's no way to get the audio happening.
Theaters had to invest in new technology to enable playback. This transition to talking movies was a financial struggle for theaters, as America was in the throes of the Great Depression.
It hits almost exactly when the Depression starts. You need to really keep that in mind, so that if somebody has to come up with $10,000 or $20,000 to outfit their theater for sound, 20% of the theaters close in the U.S. because of that. And they're small town and they're rural theaters, and they can't afford to upgrade the sound. It was a major technological shift to transform a theater into sound and get the speakers right, you know, get it so that the sound actually worked in the theater. And whether you chose initially Vitaphone, which were discs, or if it was sound on film, the initial investment was really expensive. Happens almost exactly the same time as the Depression hits. But at the local level, what it means is there's a kind of fundamental shift from the significance of live performance as part of the movie experience to not live performance, like live music or organ or whatever the particular live performance was part of it.
While theaters struggled amidst the Depression to adopt new sound reproduction capabilities, they also offered an escape from the Great Depression. Movies provided a peek into high society and could transport viewers into beautiful and exotic locations. They offered a much-needed distraction from the struggles and the hardships of the Depression.
There, how's that? Okay, good. Ah, better. But fires were very commonplace. And no one wanted to really point fingers because there was no evidence, but it was pretty clear that most of them were arson. There were union, some people blamed it on union aggravations. I'm not saying that's what it was. But according to Joseph Crouch, his transcription, he used to work there at the theater. He has a transcription there at the IU Center for Documentary Research and Practice. But he basically characterized it as union aggression, union tactics. But you know, they rebuilt that thing in about 3 months. They rebuilt the theater. The von der Schmidts had so much money, they were able to rebuild quickly. So other things that happened after, we had a lot of fires in the 30s and the 40s. I'm sure you all know that Bloomington was a segregated, everything was segregated, not just Bloomington, like the US was segregated. Blacks could not go to most of the businesses or restaurants, or couldn't even get their haircut in Bloomington. And the theaters were segregated. Blacks had to sit upstairs in the balcony. And there's a story about how George Taliaferro, the love and respect of him, and he had, if it wasn't for him, you know, none of this would have happened, because he was a well-respected and loved NFL football player, came from Bloomington, and they had his picture hanging like in the gables, and he wasn't even allowed to go in there and eat. You know, it was atrocious. This was going on in theaters, but it was really Herman B. Wells paved the way for the doors to open, and I'm going to try to play a clip, and if it doesn't work, I'm just not going to do it, but I'm going to see if I can play this next clip, because Sue Talbot does a wonderful job describing the end of segregation there at the Indiana Theater. So let's see if this works.
George Taliaferro, at that time an IU student and the first black athlete drafted into the National Football League, had a lasting impact on the Indiana theater. But it was with the help and encouragement of Herman B. Wells that segregation in Bloomington came to an end.
Herman Wells, the president of the university at the time, he simply told the restaurants and the managers of the theaters, restaurants first, he said, I'll just have all my students eat on campus all the time. They will not come to your restaurants unless you allow blacks to be served also. With that, the restaurants gradually, some of them gradually, others were fine, opened up their serving to blacks. The theaters, he told the managers, and at our theater, it was Art Clark at the time, of course, and he told them the same thing. Unless you let the blacks sit on the first floor and not relegate them to the balcony, I will have films on campus for them. They will not come to your theater. I remember I was 10 years old when this happened at the Indiana. I remember Daddy coming home for dinner between shifts that night, and he was very nervous, very tense, and that's what was going on that night. And he just hoped it went well, and it did. It went very well. And so nobody had a wrinkle about it or anything else, and so it turned out to be fine.
Yeah, so not to go into everything the documentary covers, I'm just going to run down some of the key points, because it'd be boring if you should just watch the doc, but let's see what all happened. So Harry died in 1955. Now I need my glasses. The opening of the College Mall in 1965, that had a big impact on downtown Bloomington. In fact, in the documentary, Glenda Murray gives a wonderful testimonial about the impact. We lost foot traffic. Not many people were going to watch movies downtown because there were big new theaters out by the mall, and you could go to, Lazarus and, all these wonderful stores out there, and there was ample parking. So it wasn't just the Indiana Theater, but I think all around the courthouse square, there was a decline of shoppers. Nova died in July '74. Bob Crouch and the daughter Thelma, they got married. They ran the place for a couple of years. They ran the whole. It wasn't just one theater. The von der Schmidts owned theaters in multiple places, and Bloomington was just one theater they had. And but that didn't last too. Yeah, that's right. And they had the Von Lee, and since we're talking about the Von Lee, they bought that in the 40s, and I have a date on there somewhere, but they named it the Von Lee in honor of their granddaughter, Brenda Lee. So anyway, they finally were getting rid of their theaters after Nova died, and they sold the theater to Carasotas, both of them, the Von Lee. And they closed the theater in '95, Carasotes, because they were making more money out in the mall. They weren't making much money in the downtown theaters. That Von Lee held on a little longer. But they just eventually donated it to the Bloomington Area Arts Council in December of '95. And in the documentary, it's kind of funny, there's a little soundbite of how Frank Young got the phone call from Tony Carasotas. And anyway, it's a cute little section in there when the BAAC gets it. They had to decide what to do with it, because they could have sold the building and just kept the cash. But they wanted to keep it and use it as a performing arts venue. So they made the decision to renovate it, and they started renovating with volunteers and started a big fundraising campaign. And then they were able to hire architects. But basically, they ran out of money. They just ran out of money. And they were asking, who can you give us money? And of course, a generous family stepped up. I don't need to tell you the names. But anyway, so they opened as the Buskirk-Chumley Theater. It was officially renamed at a press conference September 28, 1998. It opened shortly thereafter as the Buskirk-Chumley Theater, and shortly thereafter they ran out of money and they closed. Because they had a lot of expenses from the big renovation they did. They had a staff to pay. Now they had people. They had contracts to fulfill. So they ran short of funds, and this was a hard time for them. So they just closed. They shuttered it again. This is like the second time it happened. And then the formation of BCT management. So the city was brought in, John Fernandez, and John Fernandez like, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with this theater? And so they formed this study commission, and the study commission came up with a kind of a unique private-public partnership where BCT management, a not-for-profit, would manage the theater, but the city would own the building. And it was there were a lot of really interesting things that happened, at least to me, that aren't in the documentary, like Steak and Shake. They were given, they actually bought the lease, they bought the building because they could use it as tax credits. And then the Steak and Shake then finally gave the lease over to the city of Bloomington. But all that, it's kind of interesting information, but it's not a good documentary. So a lot of that stuff was cut out. But there was a lot of kind of nuance in how BCT management was formed, how they dealt with creating the first board of directors. And then in late 2000, basically in 2001, they hired Danielle McClellan to be the first director of the Buskirk-Chumley Theater. And her tenure there was about 20 years long. And then other high points or just key points, I'm just kind of putting some things that stand out. It was shuttered during the pandemic in March 2020, as everything was across the globe. But then they were able to carefully reopen in 2021. So someone asked me what the hardest times in the theater's history were. And I mean, it sort of depends on who you are, but for me, it kind of comes down to three instances. The first one was in 1933 when it nearly burned to the ground. But fortunately, the von der Schmidts had so much funds, had deep pockets, they were able to rebuild the theater in just like 3 months. Whereas just down the street, the Ritz that just opened, they didn't even last. They didn't last but a couple months. I don't think. So I think that was a low point. When Carasota's closed it in '95, it was shuttered. It was just an abandoned storefront in downtown. It didn't look good. There was a lot of that going on. You probably remember walking around. It was right around the revitalizing Fountain Square. There was a lot of effort that was going into downtown to make downtown viable, to make downtown work. But that was a tough time for the theater. It was shuttered. It was vacant. And I would say the third toughest time was during the pandemic. You know, a lot of theaters went out of business, a lot of restaurants, but because the theater is owned by the city of Bloomington, it's a public amenity. It's sort of like in the Parks and Rec department. Our tax dollars help pay for the infrastructure, the building itself, but everything inside, the gear, that's all run and owned by BCT management. But it's a unique, you know, because it's a city amenity, we were able to keep it open, just like we keep our parks open, and just like we keep our trails open and golf courses and whatever, you know, those things that we enjoy that increase our quality of life. Okay, so what's in the name? Officially, it's the Buskirk-Chumley Theater. I don't know, this was a little fun part in the doc, but let's see if you guys can hear this section enough for it to be kind of fun for you.
Constructed as the Indiana Theater and renamed as the Buskirk-Chumley, the theater sometimes faces a bit of an identity crisis.
The Buskirk family and the Chumley family. And so the name of the theater is the BCT, the Buskirk-Chumley Theater.
I may still call it the Indiana Theater. But that's what I grew up with it being, but I know to call it the Buskirk-Chumley.
It's Indiana. I know it's Buskirk-Chum, and I know that, and I really appreciate North Chumley getting involved and supporting it financially, but it's still the Indiana, and all the old people in Bloomington would tell you it's the Indiana. I call it the BCT.
It's the Indiana Theater.
I like to call it Bloomington's Community Theater. Danielle McClellan made that a thing. The BCT, Bloomington's Community Theater, because that's what it is. It's our gathering place.
I call it the Buskirk-Chumley Theater.
I will leave town still fighting the good fight that we should not call the theater the Buzz Chum. Because it just sounds bad. I don't know why we've allowed that to happen, but it's the BCT. So that's my parting shot. Don't call it the Buzz Chum anymore.
So whatever you do, don't call it the Buzz Chum. How's that? Yeah. The Buskirk-Chumley Theater exists thanks to more than hundreds of people that really helped keep this thing afloat. There were so many volunteers that went in, there were donors, city support, our tax dollars helped support that. But the journey to convert the once private theater into a public amenity was circuitous, and there were missteps. Some people think that the BAAC, Frank Young, shouldn't have done it. Fiscally, it wasn't the responsible thing to do, but thank goodness he did. He was, because if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have the theater. And I don't know about you guys, but the theater for me, I love the theater. It's iconic. It just kind of showcases our downtown so well. It's such a lovely place. But I'm glad it's here. It's been around for 100 years, and if we're lucky, it'll be here for another 100 years. So, you know, just to wrap this up a little bit, the theater is far more than a historic icon. It's the main performing arts venue in downtown Bloomington, and to some represents the heart and soul of our community. And I want to play the very last section. Now I want to play one other clip, actually just for Clay, because we're talking about sightlines of the theater. And I want to get there's a section where Ted Jones talks about having to re-pour the floor. But I want to give just a shout out to Ted Jones. And I don't know if any of you have actually met Ted Jones. I took lighting from him when I was about 19 years old. And Ted Jones, the Bloomington Playwrights Project's playhouse, it's named after him. Ted Jones basically designed the infrastructure in the Musical Arts Center. He designed the infrastructure at the Monroe County Public Library. He designed everything inside the theater, all the theater's rigging, sight lines, even the curve of the balcony. That was all Ted Jones, and he did it for nothing. He was just a super nice guy. That's what he did. He loved to do it. I interviewed him for the documentary, and several months, he flew all the way to Bloomington. He was living in Bimini, and he actually invited me down there, and I couldn't go down. Of course, I would have enjoyed that a lot. But Ted Jones made the trip to Bloomington to say goodbye, I think, because 3 months after he was here and I interviewed him, he passed. And so this program, it's dedicated to Ted, because it wouldn't have happened without him. So I'll play the very end, if I have it queued up right. Maybe if we're lucky, you can hear it.
It's part of something of the past that we can enjoy today.
Yeah, there's a lot of importance to this space as a building, as a historic building, the architecture, the look and feel. But what it's really about is, bringing a community together.
I love when I go to the Buskirk-Chumley Theater that the whole community is there. I love that the theater brings us together. The arts engage people.
Whatever it is that we experience as human beings, when we're doing it together, seems to be more powerful than our individual experiences. And that's what this place does for me.
I think it's important for our communities to celebrate when we do save a building, when we have something that's 100 years old, and we acknowledge that as a community and say, this was worth saving, this is worth doing.
And knowing it's here is just, one of the best things about Bloomington.
The greenest thing you can do is to not tear the building down. The greenest thing you can do is keep a building and work with it.
It's a gift that we have, and not every town has it. And I'm just really grateful that it's there.
The Bloomington Area Arts Council, which was gifted the theater by Karasotis, was dissolved in 2009. Of the 5 movie theaters that once operated in downtown Bloomington, only 3 remain standing today. But 2 of them, the Von Lee and the Princess, are no longer theaters and have been converted into restaurants. Only one, the Buskirk-Chumley Theater, known fondly as the Indiana, is still going strong. And it's easy to find in downtown Bloomington, Indiana. Just look for the shining marquee just off the courthouse square.
Thank you, Ted Jones. I'll just let those run so you get to see some of the people we interviewed. I think I interviewed about 35 people total. Well, thanks for not throwing anything. I appreciate that. I would be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
The building, is it in real good shape now?
The building's in great shape. It's in better shape than it was back in the 30s and 20s. You know, and the thing is, it's one of the interesting things about the building is like back in the day, you know, their air conditioning, what they used to do is they would bring in ice and they would dump it underneath the theater and they would blow fans, you know, fans would blow over it, and that's how their air conditioning was. And the heating was really loud. It was really loud. And so one of the things they did to renovate it in such a historically accurate way is they did move the HVAC up on the roof, so it's quiet. So it's better than it was. It looks the same, so you're in a time machine. You're going back to 1922, but it's got state-of-the-art lighting. It's got some really good treats, craft beer, and it just has great digital projection. The sound is just wonderful. So it's better than it was in 22. Yeah.
Is the seats the original?
No, I think those are all new. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And then was that a question? Yeah.
The Methodist Church had a contemporary church service there for at least 10 years. I know I went there 10 years. And it helped support it and helped keep it clean and fixed up. It was very, very popular, known as the old door. And I did know during that time frame, they also had a lot of special things, like they did a thing about Lida Carmichael, and there were a lot of things going on, you know, which it was kept alive and kept clean and updated periodically.
Oh yeah, you know, it's a public venue and anyone can rent it. I think it was only, you know, it's interesting because in the documentary, of course, I interviewed like Danielle McClellan. We had an hour-long interview, and I only ended up using about 4 or 5 minutes of her. She was great. I used more of her than anyone else in the documentary, probably. But she said in her era, they never, ever said no to someone wanting to rent the theater because, you know, it's sort of, they operate as a rental house. The only time they said no is when Playboy wanted to do a spread, you know, the college girls, and they wanted to use the theater, and they're like, no, not, we'll pass on this. Yeah, Clay.
You didn't show a photograph of the castle decorative features on both sides of the auditorium. My question is, I don't think that was unique to that theater, but are you aware of the degree to which that decorative motif was in other theaters around?
Yes, they tried to make the theaters just like magical, and I think Sue Talbot described it. It was like Disneyland. You know, there's castles and turrets, and there's one good picture that's in the documentary. I mean, I could whip it out and show you, but it wasn't. There are other theaters. So if you look at other theaters, movie palaces, just Google movie palace, and you're going to see a lot of theaters that are even more extravagant than what they were having at the Indiana Theater. But they're really like castles and, you know, all kinds of things in there. Yeah, Dwayne.
Yeah, they got rid of the castle motif when they subdivided the theater and put a screen in the balcony. That's when they got rid of the castle motif.
Yeah, and I think someone said that they once saw a play like Romeo and Juliet, and they actually used the turret in the theater when they were doing that. Yeah.
Growing up in Bloomington and going to the movies in like the 50s and 60s, if there was something at the Indiana, I think you kind of felt this little thrill because attached to the Indiana was the candy and popcorn. But that's the only place that you had those wonderful caramel apples.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you grew up in Bloomington, I think you automatically thought Indiana, okay, that's the candy shop.
Right, I'm sorry I missed that. I came here in the Indiana sweet shop days of like the 70s, so I missed out on that first, was that Gus or whatever they had. Yeah, I wasn't quite there. I wasn't here early enough. But the documentary has a lot of, there's some wonderful photos of that Levi Thomas who worked at the theater, and she's a photographer, a friend of mine, and so she took pictures of the people that worked there, and so you just have to watch the doc, but there's a whole section about the people who used to be there. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's aired. In fact, if you want to watch it, just Google Indiana Theater at 100 PBS or WTIU, and you'll see it. And you can watch it. You don't have to pay anything. It's online. You can send me $1 if you like it.
Do you have any plans of showing your documentary at the Buskirk-Chumley Theater?
You know, they did, and it was really awkward because I had literally just finished the documentary, and it was like, it's just like hot off the press, 11th hour, 12th hour. It's like, oh, you're doing a Q&A. And I didn't know if it was any good. I was, for all I know, it's like kind of was bad, because all I see are the warts. But yeah, we had a screening, and it was just mainly for the BCT Board of Directors. But there was a screening. It was fun. It was always a little awkward. But now I'm feeling a little better. You always get distance. I look at the first project I did on Elkinsville, which was probably 20 years ago. And I did that. It was supposed to be about the town that was and washed away. And yeah, and I look back at that now going, huh, that's actually not too bad. Because it helps to have some distance. But I tell you, documentaries change. It's not I think a great story, but the Elkinsville documentary, there were some people. The town of Elkinsville is down in the backwaters, sort of Lake Monroe, and there was a club of people who used to live in Elkinsville, and they came to me and said, we are mad as hell, and we're not going to take it. We're mad that the Army Corps took our land and put it in a lake. We want you to do a documentary about that, how they took our land away. And I was like, oh, okay, sure, sounds good. And I didn't do much, and they wouldn't leave me alone. And I sent some students out there, and the students didn't do that good a job, and so they just kept pestering me. And after about a year and a half, I finally said, all right, I'll put a treatment together for WTIU, and maybe they'll produce it. And so I give WTIU a treatment for this Elkinsville project, and they're like, we love it. We want you to produce it. And so I go out there thinking the story is about people being mad at the eminent domain, and I go out there with the whole crew, interview the first person. I understand that you guys are upset that the Army Corps took your land away. Well, I kind of like the lake. And I go up to the next person, well, are you mad that your family's legacy is gone? They're like, well, I took my kids out in a boat the other day, and we kind of like it. And it's like, it's totally not the story that it was supposed to be, and it ended up being, why did we put in the lake? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that documentaries, like stories, they have a life of their own, and you think they're going to be one thing, but then when you start following the breadcrumbs, they turn into something else. And it turned out to be like, why did we need to have the lake? And it kind of was intermixed with having your home taken away too. But these are fun projects for me, but they kind of develop a life of their own. So I need a little distance from this before I start to go, well, is this ugly or is this okay? I don't know. Yeah, Mike?
How many people here, old baby boomers, remember going to all three of the major theaters, the Princess at Earth Grand and the Indiana?
Oh, yeah. One of my...
From the balcony of the Indiana.
Yeah.
Curious.
Well,
that was you.
One of my favorite segments in the documentary are people describing their memories of the different theaters. And apparently the Roxy was like the worst. And Sue Talbot said there were like rats running across their feet. And then their parents wouldn't let them go there or to, I think it was the Harris Grand. But they'd let them go to like the Indiana. That was wholesome. Yeah.
A friend of mine got kicked out of the Ten Commandments. Throwing stuff from the balcony of the First Grand. A friend of yours. I'm noticing it.
Great. Yeah. Another question.
Does the documentary cover the Buskirk family, Dr. Norris Chumley?
It does. So Dr. Norris Chumley is in there. You couldn't do it without him. So he came, bless his heart, not only for his family's gift, but because he came all the way down to let me interview him. So yeah, the documentary actually has a really fun first memories of the theaters from a number of people, including Angelo Pizzo, who developed his love of screenwriting and movie making at the theater. And of course, Norris Chumley. And, but yeah, it addresses that. I feel like I should have just shown you the documentary, but I needed a better sound system, I think. Yeah, but you can watch it online. Yes?
I think the Buskirk-Chumley Theater is planning a big public event with showing the documentary.
Right, yeah, they mentioned something in June, possibly. Yes, Stephen.
So you mentioned about the financials not making sense early on. I'd worked with the Save the Indiana Theater and Frank Young, and no matter how we tried to do numbers, it's like you wanted to do that, but there's no way you could save it financially. It wouldn't make sense, you know. So in these kind of buildings that are of community interest, you have to come up with a different way than looking at them just from a totally business standpoint. And we just kind of plowed ahead, and then these other avenues to save it existed, like giving it, you talk about the credits and Steak and Shake and family donating, but it was really imprudent to go ahead, but it's like, this needs to happen, someone else will figure it out. And so it's interesting when you're saving something that's not, it's more than dollars, and you have to figure another way to do it.
Right, it's hard to put a dollar value on a quality of life. Like, how do you put a dollar value on the value of a park? You know, it's so important. You can't really, you can't quantify it. I mean, you can try, and you could put some numbers on it. But, you know, it was really a novel thing for the city to take on the theater, because that had never been done before. And now that they've done that, the city is, I believe, has taken on the old Waldron building, the city building. And it's sort of similar, I don't want to project, but to me it looks like a real similar arrangement where the city owns the building, but they're letting Constellation, you know, Cardinal Stage and PPP, they're letting that consortium basically manage the space. Because it worked. It worked well for the BCT. Well, that's great. You guys still haven't thrown stuff. That is wonderful. Thank you so much. Just as far as by the way, just what I'm going to do next. So the doc is done, but I am going to make a few revisions. I'm going to do a little color correction. I've got all these wonderful interviews that I'm going to edit and give to WTIU, the theater, and hopefully maybe give them in some form to the History Center. So that's my plans for what's coming next. But again, thank you very much.